Alright, let's go ahead and get started for today. So, welcome everyone to our Alteryx Server webinar series. I am Gabriel Villela and I will be your host today. So, continuing our series here, this is me again, right? So, for the ones that were here last session, you have already seen this, but for those who are new, I am Gabriel Villela. I am an Alteryx specialist here at Data Meaning, part of the enablement and training team. I'm a data engineer and solutions expert, and I have a few Alteryx certifications. And I have been working with Alteryx for over 4 years now. If you want to add me to LinkedIn, feel free. You can even scan the QR code there. All right. So enough about me. Just a overview here about data meaning. So these are our services here. So we provide creative services, business intelligence, data management, change management, delivery management, and education and training. In which softwares, right? So we provide solutions on all those softwares that we see here, those logos, right? And you can see it's pretty important logos there, like Alteryx, Tableau, Snowflake, AWS, Azure. We work with all them. So we are a boutique of business intelligence consultancy founded in 2005. We provide end-to-end business intelligence solution, and we are located in Florida, DC, New Jersey, Chicago, India, and Brazil. Okay. This is our agenda. Today is session number 5, admin best practices. Okay. So session number 5, Alteryx Server processes and admin best practices. We're going to start off with the gallery best practices, then we're going to move on to the installation and upgrade best practices, and finally some architecture best practices. Okay. So first off, gallery best practices. So we're going to look first at the gallery architecture. There are roles and areas that you can create within the gallery to share content, right? So for roles, remember, you can have viewer, member, artisan, and curator, right? So those are the roles for the gallery. And places where you can share workflows are the public area, right? So everyone from the company will be able to see, or you can create collections to share workflows. So keep that in mind, right? Those roles and where you can share those workflows. And keep that in mind. We're going to explore here 4 different architectures on how to create a process to develop, publish workflows onto the gallery, right? So the first one, we're going to start off with the data analyst, right? So a really simple one. And then we're going to move up to number 4, which is a little bit of more complex, but not that complex. So number 2, departmental function. Number 3, departmental focused on the consumer. And number 4, hierarchy when we have a variety of end users. Okay. So the first example here, it's the data analyst. This is when you have a small group of Alteryx content creators. On this case, those are the artisans, right? The people that have Alteryx Designer license. So a small group of Alteryx creators who develop end solutions for business decision makers in certain internal departments. Okay. On this case, what you should do, what is the best practice, right? On this case, you have a few artisans who create and parameterize and upload applications, right? So the artisans are the ones that hold the designer license, and they will do all the development, right? They will upload the applications. And they all have their own workspace to develop and push content up, right? So all the artisans will publish content to their own individual workspace, okay? They can create collections for end users and invite them to join. So the same artisan that creates the workflows and publishes will be able to create collections and invite end users to join those collections. Those collections also allow collaboration between artisans on the workflows that are shared in the collection, right? So you can have more artisans within the same collection, so then they will all be able to see those workflows and publish new versions of those workflows, okay? But keep in mind that on this example here, the artisans are the ones that are managing the new content on this gallery and it's managing the collections, right? Finally, the collection owner will then have the users tab inside the collection to add the end user, right? So just add the user right to the collection. And those users that will be added to the collection, they will only have view permissions, right? So they will only be able to see the workflows, they will be able to run the workflows, but they will not be able to manage other users, they will not be able to manage assets, they will not be able to manage anything, right? So they will just be able to see the workflows, run the workflows, and get the results. That's it. And the artisan is the one responsible for everything. It's gonna create the workflows, publish them, move users into the collections, create the collections, right? And the artisans will do all that. So that's the first example here when you have a really small group of content creators, right? Second one here, departmental. This is when you have a group of Alteryx creators who make custom applications for specific departments. You would like to share these applications across multiple users within that department. So on this case, you have multiple departments and Alteryx creators, so artisans, right, that are focused on those departments, right? So you have a few artisans who create, parameterize, and upload applications, right? Same as the last one. But now the gallery admin, not the artisan anymore. The gallery admin has created a collection to be the shared workspace for that department. So it's going to be one collection that will hold all the workflows that all the artisans have access to. So they can all work together on every workflow from that collection. And that collection is focused on that specific department. As artisans can only belong to that assigned collection, the applications they build in Alteryx Designer will now land in that department's collection, right? So they are going to use that collection as the dev area. Once the application have been tested, artisans will add them to the department's collection, to the end users, right? So there's going to be one collection that's going to act as the dev area, and then another collection or multiple other collections, right, for that specific department that will act as the prod, right, dev and prod. So then the gallery admin will add and manage users on those collections. They did like the prod one, right? So you can, this way here, you can separate what is under development, what is already onto production using collections, right? And the artisan on this case is responsible for developing the workflows for specific departments. So you have collections for specific departments, right? And the gallery administrator is the one responsible for managing the users within those collections. Okay, so that's the second scenario here. Third scenario, departmental focus on the consumer. This is when you have multiple departments consuming applications from one set of Alteryx creators. So multiple departments, multiple Alteryx developers. The end user wants to run application without knowing any of the Alteryx behind the scene logistics, right? So on this case, artisans will be added to their assigned collection, and it may be useful to have a cross-functional collection to house applications for different departments, right? The gallery admin now can only assign one collection to each artisan. Okay. The artisan uploads this to the cross-functional collection, right? And once the application have been validated, they can publish that to the end users on specific department collections. And the users that have been already invited to that collection by the gallery admin, right? So on this case here, it is focused on the consumer because you have one specific collection to each department, right? And each area within each department. The artisan is responsible for a specific department and will develop for that department, right? But you can argue, right, that this is pretty similar to the last one. It is, but those are just scenarios, right? Things that you can think of and how to create a process within the gallery to manage the assets, the users, right? And of course, this can change based on whatever you have on your company, right? The last scenario here is hierarchy. And this is when you have a variety of end users. So a range of end users requesting detailed reporting. On this case, analysts require a great range of detail for their UI on their application. So they're developing analytic apps, right, where you can develop the user interface. Therefore, the gallery admin creates collections for analysts and invites the artisan to publish more detailed applications. So on this case, the gallery admin needs to manage on which collection each artisan is, and this is constantly changing, right? So it could be like this week, this artisan is on this collection developing this, right? And then the next week, it's gonna change. That same artisan will develop something else for other department, right? And then the gallery admin will need to remove that artisan from that collection and add to another one. Management requires more cohesive and precise reporting, so these applications are hosted in a different collection for the users, right? So on this case, you're gonna have different collections for different end users. So one collection for management, another collection for just business analysts, right? And all the end users, analysts, and management are invited as viewer to just run the workflows, right? So they will not be able to manage assets or users. They will only be able to run the workflows and get the information from them. So again, right? So those are 4 scenarios that you can think of. You can brainstorm, think of scenarios that are good and can be applied on your company, right? And how you can use those roles and areas that you can share in the best way to provide the content to the end user. Okay. All right. So that's about it for the gallery architecture. Some other great tips here for the gallery is people often ask, oh, how can I send or how can I receive an email if the workflow runs with error, right? Because if you schedule workflow, you forget about it, and if the workflow is running like daily, right, and at some point it starts failing, and you're not going to be able to see that start failing unless you go into the gallery and go check on your schedules, right? What if you received an email notification telling you, oh, that workflow ran, but it error? you can do that using the events view on the workflow configuration area. So if you click on the white area somewhere in the workflow, right, you're gonna open this view here. Let me get my laser pointer here. So this view here, right, on the left side, and you go to the events tab, you click add, and then you have two options: run command and send an email. So the run command, it's for more experienced users, right? There are familiar with the CMD command prompt, right? They can create bat files to run something on the computer. And then the other option here is send email, which is this view here that I am presenting on the middle, where you can trigger email notifications before the run, after run with errors, after run without errors, or just disable it. So this is where you can set up email notifications based on workflow events, right? This is pretty useful. All right. So next one here for the gallery is workflow optimization. How can you optimize things within the workflow, right, to run on the gallery? The first one is remove unnecessary fields. And I would say remove unnecessary data, right? So you can remove fields using the select tool. And I encourage everyone doing that on every workflow. The first tool that you add right after the data, the input data tool, right, should be the select tool to already remove any fields that you don't need. And also use the filter, right? Remove records that you don't need. So if you remove all the unnecessary data, that will speed up the processing time of every workflow. Use the R run command and Python carefully, right? So you need to make sure that you have all the libraries that you used on your local designer installed on the server. And if you don't have, if you're not sure, right, you must contact the server administrator to install them for you. So you just need to mention, oh, I need this Python library, I need this R library to be installed on the server, right? And then they will be able to do that for you. Regarding the run command, remember that if you're doing anything crazy like moving files around, calling third-party applications, right? You need to make sure that you have the same exact setup on the server machine, right? The paths and everything, that should be replicable on the server machine, because that can work on your local machine because of the path, right, and everything, but that not might be true on the server. So be careful while you're using the run command too. Lastly, check any network dependencies on your workflow, right? So you can have local files being read on your workflow, or you can output to a local folder on your computer, right, using Designer. But that won't work on the server, right? You need to make sure that any dependencies that you have on your workflow are pointing to a shared network location where both your machine and the server machine will see, right, with the same address. And it is a must-have, right, that you need to add the what we call UNC path on the network connection. If you go onto options, advanced options, and then workflow dependencies on Designer, there's going to be a button to change all the dependencies that you have there to UNC, right? The network paths to UNC. And all the UNC does, it's the universal path, right, is changing from a specific driver that you have mapped on your machine. So let's say I have mapped a network path here from my company on driver called Z. But that not might be true on the server machine, right? The server machine might be pointing to that same location using drive, I don't know, G or something else. So if you have that letter for the driver there for the um, network path, it won't work when you try to upload to the server. So always make sure that you have the universal path before publishing an app to the server. Okay. A little bit more of the gallery. So theme. This is something that most people don't even realize that is possible, but it is. If you are an admin, the curator on the gallery, right, you're gonna be able to see this area here, which is the area that you can change everything, right? How the gallery looks like. You can change the server name, you can change the logo, every color for every text, right? Buttons and everything. You can change it to make it really look like an internal page of your company. And another area here that is important to highlight is this links and pages, right? You can create links here that will point to either internal pages that you can develop it here, right? So there's another item there, pages, where you can develop internal landing pages. It could be explaining things like how to use gallery connections, right? Or something to help users navigate here through the gallery. And you can then point those pages here using the links. You can even point the user to any external web page as well. And those links will be visible for the user on this area here, right? So this is a screenshot here of the user area, the home page, and you see the question mark there. If you hover your mouse over there, you're gonna see all those links that you developed there, right? It's gonna be showing up there. So really useful to have those links and help users navigate here. Okay, so that's about it for the gallery. Now let's move on to the installation and upgrade best practices. Okay, so the first thing is a checklist to install. Before the installation, make sure that you have the license key available, right? If you don't have the license key, you will not be able to uh, run the server. That you'll be able to install, right? But if you have the installer, but if you don't have the license key, the service will not run. You need to, of course, download the server installation file. You can go to licenses.alteryx.com or downloads.alteryx.com and then download from there. The Alteryx predictive tools will be asked to be installed after the server installation. So for the designer installation, right, there are two separate packages, the main designer installer and then the R package, the predictive package. For the server, is the same file, the same installation file. We'll install both, and all you gotta do is at the end of the installation, you need to just flag there, I want predictive tools, and then it's gonna run the predictive installer. Um, Data packages. So there are a few extra packages that you can purchase for Alteryx. Uh, for example, business insights or location insights, right? So you can leverage time distance between 2 points on the map. So you're gonna have to purchase some extra data packages, and then you need to make sure that you have the correct licenses and correct files downloaded for those extra packages. Be careful that for the business insights, it's a file with over 200 gigabytes, right? So you're gonna have to download that and install that. So you're gonna have to make sure that you have enough space and everything. Um, Another point here is for the Windows Service account, right? So this is the account that's gonna run the Alteryx service. Usually this is set as default, but it is recommended to have a specific account to run as for this service, because if you have a specific account, right, then you can um, easily manage the level of access for that account and things that the service, Alteryx service, can see. This is a must-have, right? Admin privilege for the server. If you don't have admin privilege, you're not gonna even be able to install anything. Um, and if you're using this, right, you need the R machine learning installer if you are using that specific tool. All right, so moving on to the configuration now. So we have already installed. Now, what about the configuration? The best practices here for the configurations are: first, the ODBC drive is installed on the server, right? So any data connection that you want to make, you need to install all the ODBC drives, T and S files for Oracle, SSL certificate for the gallery if you want the HTTPS, right? So you need to have the SSL certificate. The web address for the gallery, right? You can change that after the installation to something like some other address, right? It is recommended to have just the server machine name and then /gallery. That's the best practice. Don't forget to change the run as within the system settings as well. If you have any databases that are leveraging Windows authentication, you need to make sure that the system account is able to access that. Or if they are using explicit user and password, right, you need to make sure that you have them to add those gallery connections. And any SFTP or shared drive access for the service account, right? You need to make sure that the service account is able to see everything. Now, for the authentication of the gallery, you have a few options. It is recommended as a best practice to have Windows authentication or Windows authentication with Kerberos or SAML, right? Those are the recommendations here. If you choose one of them, it is not recommended to change, because you're gonna have a really big trouble to change that, and it is not recommended to change the authentication method once you have set at the first time. You need to figure out who's going to be the gallery administrator. Usually is the one that is installing the server, the first admin, right? Then you can add more after when you access the gallery. You need SMTP info because the server will send out email notifications, right? So you're gonna need some SMTP info to fill that on the system settings as well. And the ports, you need to open a few ports. Usually the 80 or 443, right? They are already enabled. You don't need to worry about that. And for the database communication, the communication between the controller and the MongoDB, right? They use this port here, 27018. Okay. Lastly, a few points here for the gallery settings. So you can access the gallery settings, and it is good to have one shareable workflow ready to be uploaded, right? So you can test it right after the installation. Create at least 2 user accounts there, right? Just to see if things are working properly. Create at least one data connection, right? So go into the gallery, data connections there, create at least one connection there. Just make sure that will work properly. And oh, that's something good to point out. Alteryx Designer will be installed on the server machine, right? So Alteryx Designer comes with the Alteryx Server installation file. And you're gonna have one Designer instance on the server, right? If you remote desktop there, right, you're gonna see Alteryx Designer there. Any macros that you have on your company, publish them to the gallery, right, and reference them on the gallery so then users can leverage them. And lastly, right, just update the logo on the gallery. You can change the image there to the your component logo. Okay. All right, so that's about it here for the checklist. Now, a few best practices here for upgrades. So you have already a Alteryx Server instance installed. You need to upgrade to a more recent version. On this case, it is good to run the pre-upgrade check app, and you need to correct any issues if you found any, right? You can just Google this and it's gonna point you to this URL there. Backup the MongoDB, right? Always backup the MongoDB before the upgrade, so then you can have a backup copy in case things go south. And list all custom tools and libraries, right? List all the custom tools and libraries because after the installation, you might need to reinstall them. And that's for connectors, Python, and R packages, okay? And I highly encourage everyone to go onto the Alteryx community and access the knowledge base for Designer and the server. There, you're gonna have a lot of detailed articles on how to deal with pretty much anything on the Designer and the server, right? Regarding installation, configuration, and everything, and even non-issues. Okay. Now I'm gonna touch here a little bit on the architecture for the server. And I'm not gonna go into too much detail about the architecture, just some best practice, because you guys are gonna have a specific webinar here just to talk about architecture, okay? So this is a single node environment. You can see here that you have this box here, right? This is the server, and those are the server components. So you have the scheduler, the gallery, controller, worker, and the database. The designer here, it's gonna connect to the server, and then the web browser here, it's representing the gallery access, right? So when do you need to scale this? This is a single node, right? So everyone start on this architecture here, but maybe you need to scale things, right? How do you determine that? The best practice around that is if you need redundancy, then you might need to scale the worker machine, the gallery machine, or the database machine. You can scale all of them, right? If you need redundancy. Same for high availability. If the workflow execution time increases, you probably need to look at the worker machine, right? And you need to upgrade the worker machine or have more worker machines available. The number of simultaneous users increase, so we have more users accessing the gallery, right? So you need to scale the worker and the gallery. Number of backend jobs increase, you need to scale the worker. Workflow sitting in queue for long periods of time, you need to scale the worker. Memory or CPU consumption is high on the web nodes. That means that you have a lot of traffic on the gallery, right? So then you need to scale the gallery. This is the view here of everything that you can scale, right? So for the gallery, you can scale the gallery on its own machine, and you can even have a load balance, right? And two galleries acting as replica, one of the other. And the load balancer here will manage the access on all the gallery machines that you have. Same for the database, right? So the database, you can have replica sets for the database, and that will make sure that you have a high availability environment. And for the workers, you have more processing power, right? You have more CPU, more RAM on each machine, and then you are going to be able to run more jobs concurrently, for example. Okay, and this is just an overview here of a recommendation from Alteryx on what you should do depending on how many active users you have, right? Think this as users you have uh, accessing the gallery at the same time and running jobs at the same time, right? So you can go from a small deployment here, just a single node deployment, into a X large, right, where you have like 4 workers, 3 storage replica sets, and load balancer for the gallery. Okay, so this is a recommendation for Alteryx here, best practice. Okay. All right. So this concludes here our session on best practices. This is our webinar series map here. The next scheduled session here is next Wednesday. The topic will be, do I need to call IT, right? And that's focused on the end users, developer, and the gallery admin. Our offers here related to the Alteryx server are assessment and planning, server installation, server migration and upgrades, and the server health check, right? We provide enablement and training and also manage services. All right, I just want to thank you everyone for attending. I'm gonna open now for any questions, anything you guys have here under the Q&A. Let me check and see if you guys have anything now. All right, so let's see here the questions. I see a few questions here. Let's go over them. Are the workflow event settings included in the workflow XML for future reporting and parsing? Yes. Anything that you configure on the workflow, you can access that through the XML. The XML, for those who don't know, is like the code behind the workflow, right? You can open a YXMD file as XML, and then you can add it directly on the source code for the workflow. Yes, it is possible to edit the workflow event settings on the XML. What if a job is stuck anyway to mail when the job is stalled or stuck in the queue for more than 2 minutes? It is possible to have a notification on that, but not that straightforward. You will need to develop something that will look into the MongoDB, so the database, right, behind the gallery, because on that place you be able to see a lot of information around the queue and everything, right? Then you'll be able to see if a job is stuck there for over 10 minutes, and you need to develop an application or something that will query that MongoDB and notify you if a job is stuck for over 10 minutes. It is possible, right? But not that straightforward. You cannot do that easily from the user interface. Can an admin have a view of all the workflows which have failed for a particular view out of the box? Yes, an admin can view all the failed jobs if they run the what we call the usage report, right? When you download the Alteryx server file, you also have the possibility to download another file there, which is the usage report, which is a workflow that you run, and then it's going to produce a PDF with a detailed information of usage for the server, and it's going to contain a list of all the failed jobs for a particular period of time that you select. And you can even export that to like Tableau or something, right, to create a dashboard if you want. Another question. In terms of server RAM and network requirements, can you provide any insights? Um, Alteryx has its recommendation around the minimum requirements for the RAM and CPU, right? The recommendation from Alteryx is 16 gigs of RAM, but I don't particularly agree with that. But if you want to follow that, that's fine. But I recommend everyone having at least 32 gigabytes of RAM, right? And for the network, um, you, I wouldn't say that you need like a gigabyte connection or something, right? But it's good to have a fast internet, especially because depending on how many users you have querying the the gallery each time, right? And uploading things, right? So all the artisans publishing things, right? You need to make sure you account to all that, and the bandwidth it's available. You have enough bandwidth, right, for it to handle that. Does Alteryx offer any hosted server solutions? No, Alteryx does not offer any host server solution. All the clients, they will need to manage that on their own. They can purchase AWS or like EC2 or something, right, on Azure to do that. I want to know the difference between controller and worker. Oh, okay. If you don't know the difference between the server assets, you will see that on the following sessions, right? I think, especially on the architecture talk that we're gonna have in the future, you're gonna see in detail each component of the server, and you're gonna understand the difference between the controller and the worker. Basically, just to give an answer now, is that the controller will control the jobs, right? Will control the queue, and the worker will run the workflow, right? It's the worker is the machine that will do all the processing. How many jobs will create in the next few years for Alteryx Server administration? I'm not sure if I am able to answer that question. Um, for scaling of worker nodes, is better to have more smaller machines, few cores, or larger one, more cores? Okay, yeah. So that's a really good talk. Uh, you're gonna have to decide that based on the type of job that you're running, that the your Alteryx users, right, are requiring. You're gonna have to think about that. Um, like if you have just a few workflows that require a lot of processing, or a lot of workflows that need to run at the same time, but they don't take that much processing, right? And you also need to take into consideration the licensing cost, because you're gonna have an extra cost for each worker machine, and the cost is different if you increase the number of cores or the number of worker machines. So you need to talk with your Alteryx sales representative in order to have that on the paper, right? And then you can make the decision. What is the current guidance around deploying AMP in server environment? So the AMP engine is the new engine, right, that runs um, the workflows a little bit faster. Rather, I would say much faster, right? And since the 2020, 2022.1 update, The AMP engine has become the default one. So Alteryx is saying that it is stable enough to become the default one from 2022.1 going forward. So that's the recommendation from Alteryx. I wouldn't recommend having AMP enabled before that. If you have 2022.1, then you can go forward and enable that. For any past versions, I wouldn't recommend doing that. Okay. All right. So I don't see any further questions here. I hope you guys enjoyed the session, learned a little bit more of the best practice around the server. Oh, there's another question here that just came. Is there an ready-made tool where I can promote my dev Alteryx flows into prod? There isn't. You will need to develop your own solution into moving. If you have two Alteryx servers, right? One as the dev, another server as the prod. You need to develop your own application to run all the API calls required to move things around them. We at Data Mini offer that. If you want to talk to us, we can offer you a solution to do that. Okay. All right. So I hope you guys enjoyed this session. I don't see any further questions here. And I see you all on the next one. Thank you.